Well, I think your analysis was very straight line. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing funds.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got that.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Come on, Lou Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
the
an
Chinese critic.
erratic
Michael
detective, is Michael Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? Look, girl, how you deal with that? You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Gildarie, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Hello there. Welcome to the Freddie Kissoon Show with co-host Akash Prasad. Wherever you are, based on different time zones, good night, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Our guest this evening is one of the most interesting academics you can meet. A man who I had to use his book in my first year at university, and he is still writing. One of the most prolific academic in a global context, I would like to think, because he just keeps writing. Now, if I read his book, compulsorily on the reading list by Professor Perry Mars in 1974, that is 50 years ago, and Professor Jay Mandle is still writing. We will talk about this man's extensive production in scholarship because he writes on the Caribbean. And then we'll talk about his life, and we'll talk about one of the fantastic achievements in his personal life. And you will see that in the form of a video. But just wait, and you will see the unfolding of the life of this interesting man who has been a friend and a comrade of Caribbean people and Caribbean culture the past 50 years. Welcome to my co-host Akash Prasad, and we'll start with the life of Professor Jay Mandle. I never knew when I was a student at UG that I thought that his friendship with the UG radicals in the 70s, he was visiting Guyana for the first time when UG and the non-aligned movement and dependency theory and all those things were sweeping the world. But I've been told he was here in the 60s. Jay, welcome. It is an honor to sit next to a man whose work I had to read as a freshman at university. This is our co-host, Akash Prasad.
It's my pleasure to be here. I watch your TV program all the time, and I watch your
Thank you so much. It really is a pleasure and an honor too.
Right.
Now, what were you doing in Guyana in the turbulent 60s?
Okay.
How did you survive? Did you get a flight to go back out in those crazy days?
So my involvement in the Caribbean dates from an even earlier period. I grew up in a left-wing family, very influenced by Marxism. And there was one personality, politically, who was both a Marxist and did something that Marxists typically don't do. He kept winning elections. It was Chetty Jagan. And I was very interested in how this was when I was maybe 17 or 18 years old, I was very interested in how a Marxist could be so successful. So I, from a very early age, was interested in reading about Guyana, and in particular Chetty Jagan. I had the opportunity to do studies of Guyana when I was in graduate school, and I wrote my dissertation on the demography of the country. So I've been doing this now for a long time, but it was that interest that sparked it. The book that you probably read was a version of that dissertation. It was a demography study. And of course, in the context of the Guyana, demography is very important. The flows of population that come in, the ethnic composition of the country that emerges. After my dissertation was quite well underway, I wrote a letter to Dr. Jagan saying, I have just learned that you're establishing the University of Guyana, and I would like to be part of that development. He wrote back to me. I was very surprised, saying it was too early to do that, but he passed that letter, that correspondence, on to people at the University of the West Indies. And then through that process, my first job was at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, as I don't remember what kind of lecturer they called me, but they called me such a lecturer. Now, that experience at Mona in the late 60s, in 66, 67, Mona was a great place to be. This was several years after the Federation had broken down, and there was a great deal of discussion of how the region should proceed thereafter. And a central point of that discussion was the group called New World. And a central personality in New World was a person named George Beckford. Beckford got a hold of Joan and me and wanted us to talk to the group about our experience in the civil rights movement in the United States. I thought it was inappropriate for somebody new to the region to come and lecture. That didn't seem to me right. And so I turned him down. But he persisted. He persisted and he persisted and he persisted until finally the two of us made a presentation of our experiences in the civil rights movement in the United States. Soon thereafter, a policeman came to our flat on the campus and said, by the way, Joan was pregnant at the time. Soon thereafter, a policeman came to our flat on the campus and said to me, if it were not for the condition of your wife, who was pregnant at the time, you would have to leave the country tomorrow. But as it is, you have to leave the country within 10 days. Then ensued what the Gleaner, the Jamaican newspaper, called the Mandle affair, in which the faculty, especially the faculty union, WIGIT, West Indian Group of University Teachers, defended me. And I was sitting, not knowing these people who were defending me, symbolic of academic freedom. We lost. We were deported. Soon thereafter, a transfer emerged, and we went to teach it in what was not Cave Hill yet. It was the Deepwater Harbor in Barbados. And that was my actual first teaching experience in the Caribbean. It was at the Deepwater Harbor in Barbados as a result of our being deported from Jamaica. Soon thereafter, as you know, the country blew up when the Rodney riots had occurred, but I preceded him.
So you, Shearer, deported two Caribbean scholars, you and Rodney, but then you, Shearer, the Prime Minister at that time.
Shearer was Prime Minister, that's right.
They've never been, over the decades, an apology to you by subsequent Jamaican government.
No, actually, interestingly, maybe 7 or 8 years later, I was returning to Jamaica for a conference, I think. And I went to through immigration, And the immigration official looked at me and he said, Mandle. Oh, he said, Mandle. I know that name. And he went through his files. He said, yes, you're now clear. So I never got an official apology.
Before Akash comes in, what was the event or the incident or the action that triggered the anger of the Ushaira government?
I am not completely sure. There were several possibilities. One, most of the people that were around us in the Mandle affair thought that it was a proxy fight between the university and, of course, New World and the government, and I was only being taken advantage of. You have to understand, this was in the middle of the 60s. Joan and I were political activists, and we did a terrible thing. We visited the Cuban embassy. I mean, from the American perspective, from the American government's perspective, that was an awful thing to do. And actually, I received a handwritten little scrap of paper from somebody in the American embassy saying to me, I want you to know we had no part of this, which made me think exactly the opposite. Why would they even bother to say such a thing that they thought? So I don't exactly know. But it was something political, either because of our activism, because we came with a reputation for being activists. Was this Cuban incident? Was it our participation in New World? It was something like that, but I can't pin it down more specifically than that.
Akash?
Professor Mandle, I want to, you said you were here in the 60s.
Yeah.
What was captivating about Guyana, the culture and the food? What captured you?
That original one was because I had developed this dissertation and I hadn't visited the country, and so that didn't seem right. Mm-hmm. So I think it was, if I'm right, I think it was that around Christmas time of the semester that I was teaching at the Deepwater Harbor in Barbados. I think that's when we came. Because I was still all but dissertation. The thing wasn't finished yet. And I wanted to visit the place before, I got a PhD. That didn't seem right to otherwise have a PhD never having visited the country. That just seemed wrong.
And it must have been an explosion of culture and all of that when you were here.
Well, that was the time. That was the time that Guyana was referred to as BG. Booker's Guyana, and that it was very much the sense still of a colonial power. I remember Clive Thomas and his wife then Alice visited us. We were at the Park Hotel, and either Alice or Clive said to us, if just a few years ago people with our skin coloration would not have been allowed in that hotel. That was something which an outsider like myself would not have known, and that's why it's important to visit a country to be able to get the nitty-gritty of life aside just what an academic learns.
Wow.
Okay, we want to show our view. We're going to come to your prolific production in academia. This paper that I got from you last year. Yeah. But let's show our viewers this clip, and we'll talk about that. Let's show our viewers this clip. You could look it on the screen.
Yeah. Nice play, Donald. I remember that play. Beautiful. Go, 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 go. Yes. All right. Get it. Good. Woo. Boy, does that bring back memories. Wow, wow, wow. Go, go, go. Yes. Yes. That was his specialty. He was a shot blocker. There it is again. Yes, sir. Great. Nothing like a highlight film, I tell you that. Nice pass. Oh, there it is. Good. Ah, watch out, watch out, watch out. Oh. Left-handed. Did you see that was left-handed? He's right-handed. He's good. He's good. That's the strength. That's called coming from the weak side to where the ball is and meeting the shooter. That's classic play. Ouch. Fight him, fight him, fight him, fight him. There it is again. Ooh, that's a hard play to make.
The big guy.
Yeah. Hey, 6'10". Go, go, go. Yes. Boom.
Okay,
right.
that 6'10" basketball player, the clip you saw was the NBA. Tell us about your relation with that guy. Who's that guy to you?
Right. Okay, so in 1985, I was a visiting professor teaching agricultural economics in Trinidad, St. Augustine. Joan was home. She was the first campaign manager for an incumbent congressman. So I was alone. I went to a village called Arima to watch an outdoor basketball game. The game was very well played and quite intense. Let me put it gently, the refereeing was mediocre at best. I was a internationally licensed referee myself, and I went to the director of the league in Arima and said I could help him out. I could do refereeing, But what really I could do was help to teach the referees how to administer the game in a fashion better than they were doing at the time. And he agreed. And so then ensued 6 or 7 consecutive years when teaching in the United States was over. Joan and I would come to the Caribbean and work with, among other people, a lot of the time, Reds Pereira, who is Guyanese and very well known, and I still correspond to Reds. Reds was at the time the head of the sports desk of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS. And what Reds would do was arrange for us to go from island to island, connecting to the basketball associations in the various islands. Joan would be teaching the table officials. I would be teaching the referees, but a lot of the teaching was my actual refereeing. So they would see, what a kind of professional level official would look like, and I'd be like a model, a role model. So there was a club Red set up to do this in Dominica at a club championship. Our biological son, Johnny, was with us. And there was a game between the Valley Nets from Union Island, St. Vincent, and I don't remember what the other team was. And I was refereeing this game. Johnny was videotaping this game. And there was this young kid who really couldn't play basketball, but was a fantastic athlete. And it was hard for me to concentrate on the game because I was watching this wonderful athlete run up and down the court in a way that just got my attention. Game over. I go up to him and I say, if your athleticism is sufficiently high that you could use it to get an education in the United States, are you interested in that? I didn't know this kid at all. Yes was the answer. A month later, he was on a plane flying to the United States, living with us, to live with us. I was teaching at Colgate University in this village, a very small village, Hamilton, New York. And this person turned out to be O'Donnell Foyle. And O'Donnell enrolled in the high school in the village that we were living. He had a lot of academic work to make up. He was not, in Union Island, he was not sufficiently motivated to work hard academically. And that was the major impediment to his being outstanding. He's a very, very smart kid who had that intelligence hidden by the lack of motivation. And so the two of us, Joan and I, had the responsibility of working through that so that his native intelligence could flourish and flower. And in the meantime, we had the responsibility of figuring out what to do with this incredible athletic talent. There was like a two-stream thing. On one hand, to motivate his academic accomplishments, and at the same time, recognize that he had an outsized talent as an athlete. It was a period of time when almost all of my, and I think also Joan's, attention was directed to O'Donnell. There was, in that sense, a kind of hiatus in my academic career because we couldn't do everything. I myself had to give up my own basketball refereeing career because I wanted to go every game that O'Donnell would play. And the way we handled this is we explained to O'Donnell, because it's an unusual situation where there's an athlete and this is an academic family. How do these two match? And the approach that we took was that we said to him and reiterated considerably, this basketball is part of the performing arts. If you were a violinist, you would have to work very hard. If you were a ballet dancer, you would have to work very hard to master the craft, to master the techniques that are necessary. And it worked. He understood that he could fit into our family because we saw virtue in his mastering the techniques of being a basketball prodigy. And he was a basketball prodigy. No sooner than he played in games for the high school, and the high school games attracted the whole village. I mean, everybody in the village came to those games. And he worked hard at mastering footwork, techniques of shooting, and such like that. Came his graduation. I have to tell you a story about his graduation. We called a press conference. It was a press conference. And the press conference was involved about, well, what college is he going to go to? Next level up, right? And all of the big schools in the United States were recruiting him. We were massively inundated with letters of recruitment. So there is a press conference, and it's in the high school. Lots of people attended. We're in the background. O'Donnell and I are walking getting to the press conference. And I say to O'Donnell, the usual protocol in a thing like this is that you open up a press conference with a joke. I'm sorry, O'Donnell, but I just can't think of a joke that would help you to start out this press conference where he's going to announce the college that he's going to go to. So we walk out, we all sit behind the table, something like this. And O'Donnell starts and he says, I'm so happy that you all are here to hear me make this announcement. And my announcement is that I'm not going to go to college. I am returning to the Caribbean. The whole room explodes. No,
it's his joke.
It was such an anomaly because when a kid like that is recruited, it's such an honor to go to Duke or to go to North Carolina.
When you go back to the States, if he missed this program, please make sure he sees it, right?
That's right.
Please make sure.
I will do that.
Akash?
Yeah. That's quite unique, that and here was this young man from the Caribbean, and he went on to have a magnificent career. Played for over a decade in the NBA. Yeah. What an achievement, O'Donnell Foyle. And I hope our viewers can go and look up some of the stuff that O'Donnell has done. Professor, let me ask, you've authored a number of books on the Caribbean and the USA where you're from.
Yeah.
Just like a great composer of music and all their works, there is always that one that is a favorite of theirs. Which one is it for you?
Okay, there are actually two.
Oh, brilliant.
Joan and I run a nonprofit organization called Democracy Matters. So this is the American publication that I'm most proud of. What we do is we actually hire students on college campuses to form Democracy Matters chapters. The focus of the Democracy Matters chapters is to deepen and enrich the democratic content of American politics. And our particular emphasis has been what I think is a weakness in democratic theory. And that weakness is the process of doing politics requires resources. It's not done for free. And in a system like that in the United States, where it's funded from very wealthy sources, the source becomes a determinant of the content of the political process. And so our idea was that political system should be treated as a public good. And the financing, in order to make the democratic process more democratic, more responsive to the needs of the people rather than the donors, there should be a source of funding for the political process that comes from the public sector rather than just from. So we have a book called I can't remember, but so that's my favorite. Now, Freddie, the second one. The second one is a book that I did on the Grenada Revolution, about which you know a great deal. And in that book, written as a left person, I'm a politically
You've always been left.
I still am.
Perhaps one of the most consistent leftist thinker in the history of the West Indies.
But nevertheless, I hold out, as you could just hear from my discussion of democracy, my leftism is rooted in a commitment to democratic practice. So I wrote a book on the Grenada Revolution. Now, I mean, the people who were involved in the Grenada Revolution, especially Bishop, Morris Bishop, were people who were in and around New World and all the offspring from New World. And I looked at the Grenada Revolution as intellectuals who succumbed to the idea that they should be in charge, that they knew better than the Grenadian people what would be good for Grenada. They were paternalistic, I thought. And I'm very proud of that book because I was obviously sympathetic to the initial goals of the Grenada Revolution. But paternalism, kind of rooted in the Marxism-Leninism that they imbibed from the Soviet Union, I thought that as a leftist, it was my responsibility to rein in the paternalism and move it to the direction of democratic participation. So in response to, and you can see that in both of the things that I'm citing, the core is democratic participation of the population. In one case, in the United States, with regard to the question of financing. In the other case, in the case of Grenada, the problem of paternalistic rule that comes from one-party rule. So both are kind of rooted in the same thing, but went off in different directions.
Okay, this should interest the society now, government, ministers, the government, what we're going to discuss. Guyana is a petro economy now. There's lots of people coming in here, plus the crisis in Venezuela, as I've seen more than a dozen Venezuelans here. You're here to give a talk around that area. Tell us about that talk.
So the background to this. I know I am not Guyanese. I know that. And I know that I visit Guyana, but I don't live in Guyana. And so there are things that remain that I don't know, I cannot know, and I don't write about those things. I respect the fact that distance means an inability to know a lot about what is going on the ground. At the same time, I know that there are advantages to being an outsider. these are small societies. The Caribbean societies are all small, and it tends to be ingrown with respect to thinking about the society and where it's going to go. So what I have done is I have tried to see and write about aspects of Caribbean society that either are hard for the people in the region to see or hard for the people in the region to talk about. So the two lectures that I am doing fit into that kind of scene. On one hand, so what I see and what I think is not sufficiently discussed in the region or seen in the region are the two things that I'm going to lecture about. I don't see enough discussion about the threat that climate change is threatening, the threat that climate change is to the physical presence in Guyana. So the lecture at the University of Guyana is going to be on the threat that I think is not being discussed enough, that is, the coast is really in jeopardy. And there needs to be quite a good discussion about what is going to happen, how is the population going to be relocated, because the sea is coming, the water is coming from the interior, and soon much of the coastal plain will be uninhabitable. I don't hear enough about that discussion, so that's one of the lectures. I did a lecture like that about 6 or 7 years ago, and I'm refraining that. The second is, I am concerned that there's not enough discussion about the resource curse. I mean, everybody knows about the resource curse, but I don't think there has been enough insight into the specifics of how the resource curse can be resisted. Unambiguously, the country already is benefiting from petroleum. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. But the resource curse is a serious problem, and avoiding it requires, among other things, institutional building, where policies emerge specifically to create an alternative economy, an alternative sector of the economy, so that the country is not solely and wholly dependent upon petroleum, because that's too risky to do. So I see my role as not to get involved in things that I simply cannot possibly know enough about to do intelligently, but at the same time as a dispassionate observer with my values still, operative. I see my role as helping to point to things that are either hard to see or hard to discuss. And I've been doing this for some years now, and that's the kind of intellectual role that I think I have carved out for myself.
Akash?
Since your great work on Guyana, Plantation Economy, Population and Economic Change in Guyana, published in 1973.
Yeah.
How far has Guyana's economy come? That is a huge break from the economic era from when you wrote that book in 1973.
When I lived in Guyana in the 1970s, I would have said not much. That was a very hard year. We were here teaching. I had a Fulbright. I was at the University of Guyana from 77, 78. And we suffered along with the Guyanese population in that years. In the aftermath of the kind of socialism that was created, and especially when Jay Mandle came to power, the country became more conventional. And trying to attract foreign capital, using markets. And to some extent, it has to be said that it recovered. There was recovery. But neoliberalism, even when Jagan was the president, has associated with it the inevitable inequalities that have come from market-determined societies. So yes, the economy did move forward from the depths of the experience of the 1970s. And credit has to be assigned where credit is due. But it left questions of income inequality and alienation still operative, because that's what market economies do. Now, the new situation, especially with the discovery in 2015 and then the first petroleum in 2020, on one hand, as I just got done saying, there is the threat of the resource curse that is always present. On the other hand, even now, when Thomas Singh drove us around, the country is tremendously different. I mean, it's almost unrecognizable, and presents the country with the real potential and real opportunity, not only to avoid the resource curse, but to use the wealth which is generated from petroleum to advance the standard of living of what remains a relatively low-income population taken as a whole. It's too soon to tell. It's not possible right now to say how, between the resource curse on one hand and benefiting the population on the other hand, how the country will emerge. I'm worried. What worries me primarily is that I don't see in the country enough discussion of the two paths that I am arguing about. And again, that's what I see as my role, to point out that this is a situation that confronts the country, and the country still, at this point, I think, is at a choice point with regard to that.
There is no way, absolutely no way. I can't conceive of it because of knowing who you are. I was a young man at the university. I think you're one of the Caribbean academic. I don't see you as American.
Thank you. That's a compliment.
You know a lot about it. I've read your stuff on Grenada. And I think if I would not for a moment think of having you in an interview and not discussing the period of the 70s in which you rubbed shoulders with the movement that was likely to topple Burnham.
Right.
Why did Rodney fail to remove Burnham? Why wasn't there a revolution?
I don't think their country was in a revolutionary situation. And I think that near the end, like in 1979, the WPA overstated its power. I'm not denying that it was a powerful institution. And I know that there were some guns involved on their side. It was not possible for a revolution overthrowing Burnham to be successful without the full support of the opposition. And the full support of the opposition involved Jagan and the PPP. And there was a disagreement between Rodney and the WPA on one hand, or at least some elements of the WPA, and the PPP and Jagan over the revolutionary potential that existed. It was not that many years after the riots of the 60s that the military weakness of the PPP and the Indo-Guyanese population was revealed for all to see, because the opposition to the PPP was in Georgetown, and the population was concentrated, and there was an imbalance in the military capacity. I did a chapter of a book that may or may not get published on Rodney. And Rodney in Tanzania also overestimated the revolutionary potential that existed in Tanzania and Africa more generally. So in answer to your specific question, in the absence of the Indo-Guyanese population joining with the WPA and its constituency, which was largely Afro-Guyanese, I don't think there was enough revolutionary support to overthrow Burnham. And I think fundamentally that's what Jagan thought, that this was premature, that the alignment of forces was inadequate. And I mean, the tragic death of Rodney is kind of evidence of the fact that the revolutionary side couldn't protect its own.
Akash?
You've written a book in 2010 on the West Indies titled Persistent Underdevelopment. Mm-hmm. Is that still persistent?
Well, excluding Guyana. Right. Guyana breaks the mold.
Yeah.
What we need to have, and again, this is what I try to contribute to the discussion, is what is it that you mean when you say economic development? Mm-hmm. And what is for sure certain is it is not adequately captured by GDP per capita. That's just not, that doesn't get it. A modern society, a modern developed society, is a society in which the people are empowered to be able to make innovation in the structure of the production, to take advantage of the opportunities that are available both in the global economy, domestically, and especially with respect to the skills the population possesses. The region has succumbed to, in many cases, not all, Trinidad is a partial exception. The region has succumbed to the idea that the only thing that is important are the things that come easily, and in the region, in most parts of the region, it's sun, sand, and sea. And okay, I have no problem with tourism, but I have a problem with only tourism. And the region has not sufficiently understood that to be a developed society, it's necessary to be able to go beyond what you have now and advance further in new directions, So the region, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Barbados. I taught, at Cave Hill two or three different times. Barbados is a fairly prosperous society that has become satisfied that tourism is the be-all and the end-all of what can be accomplished there. And by succumbing to that temptation, it has stagnated. So what I tried to do in that book is discuss the fact that the natural resources that allow for a successful tourism industry to emerge is an inadequate basis for producing a prosperous society over time. I don't know how well I succeeded, but that's what my intention was with that book.
There was a controversy stirring around the place in the newspapers. I know from reading your stuff, I know from this article here, which we will deal with, you seem to have sentiments for Chedi Jagan. Well, obviously you were ingrained leftist. Now, these two books have been published recently and they're causing controversy. Chetty Jagan and the Cold War, 1946-1992, by Clem Sicheran. He makes the point in this compendious volume that Jagan self-destruct, and in the process, Guyana was destroyed because you had a Cold War, you had a ubiquitous United States running rampage, confronting communism, and this man, Jagan, says he's a communist. And so his destiny was shaped by American rat. And then you have the Oxford historian, the Oxford lecturer from Ireland, Oxford historian, Salvaging Democracy. It says the United States and Britain in British Guyana. Now, Sicheran takes the position that Jagan messed up. Guyana would have been different. The man was communist. The Americans going after communists. What was wrong with him? Sillery says no. Jagan wasn't that communist as people perceived him to be. The man was a democratic guy who was willing to accommodate the United States. But the United States were looking for looking for anti-colonial politicians under their bed. So she takes the position that whatever Jagan did, if Jagan had gone to the Americans and say, look, tell me what you want, she said the Americans would have removed him. So two different positions on Jagan.
I want to split the middle between the two. On one hand, yes, Jagan in power was quite willing, excuse me, to accommodate. So that part is right. On the other hand, given the way that he talked, the way that from time to time he made it clear that his sympathies, if not his practice, but his sympathies were with the Soviet Union, fit so badly with American anti-communism that notwithstanding the fact that he was willing to make accommodations, he also fed into the American political stream, and this was John F. Kennedy in particular, that he triggered that reaction. And I think that that's the balance that has to be struck with him. Because later in his life, obviously he demonstrated he could accommodate. And I don't doubt that if he had been given the opportunity to accommodate early, he would have. But he also has a responsibility for understanding what his language did. Now, you could say the Americans and their anti-communism was quite irrational, and I would agree with that. But when you're a political activist, you have to understand that your language triggers responses from your opponents. And Chetty never understood that. Chetty never understood that his repetition of formulations that came from the Soviet Union triggered in the Americans a response that he then couldn't control. That's why I say I want to split the middle between these two. I do give him some responsibility for not tempering his language, though in practice he would have been willing to accommodate.
You have published several works on Black American poverty.
Yeah.
What are your views on this subject in 2024?
So the book that I wrote on this was really informed by the Caribbean. The book I wrote on this came after my experience about learning about plantation agriculture in the Caribbean. I finished that, came back. I was teaching at the time at Temple University in Philadelphia. I came back and I looked at the literature on the Black experience in the United States. And to my great surprise, the model of the plantation economy that I had learned from Lloyd Best and others in the Caribbean, that model fit the American experience. And I don't only mean with regard to slavery, but with respect to the southern states in the aftermath of slavery. It looked to me a lot like how plantations in the Caribbean had survived using, among other things, indentured labor. The plantations had survived in the United States using not indentured labor, but sharecropping and other means by which plantation agriculture was able to survive the emancipation of the slaves and the ending of slavery. Now, plantation agriculture is a trap that inhibits economic development because what it involves is the production technique involves very large uses of labor and very little use of capital. And that's exactly what you don't want to do if you're going to have an economically developed society. You want to use capital to introduce new technology so that you can become more productive. Instead, with plantation agriculture, you use masses of labor, little capital, and achieve very little technological change. I, to this day, think that in the understanding of Black deprivation in the United States, which still persists, that historical phenomenon that existed from about 1865 when American slavery ended to about World War I, that's the root of the Black economic deprivation that exists here.
Professor Mandle, the operator say we're nearing 2 minutes time. Let's contribute to Guyana historiography. I don't think the admirers of AUC Guyana has read what you have said, and so I will quote what you have said because I think this forms part of Guyana's historiography. This is a paper by you, Chaddy Jagan, and the ultra left in Guyana. Here is what you said about Guyana. Sidney King, you're referring to him in those days, by advocating a domestic coalition that extended to elections and by supporting the West Indian Federation, became part of the Creole opposition to East Indian claims for enhanced political influence. And you went on to say, despite his Marxism, Jagan perceived that a fair distribution of power in Guyana required a reckoning with the subordinate status of Indo-Guyanese population. AUC Guyana's unwillingness to concede the importance of that issue meant he was blind to the legitimacy of Indo-Guyanese communal concerns. I don't think those views in Guyana in which you say he endorsed and he was part of the Creole thing that didn't take into consideration legitimate Indian concerns. Quickly, and then we're going to ask the lady in your life to just quickly appeal for our viewers to see her.
Good.
A woman that you've been married to 60 years for.
Partner in politics and life.
But apart from that, wait, don't answer that question.
Okay.
A more important question.
Yeah.
I was at UG to see who your friends were. I was a student. Your friends were Clive Thomas, Morris Oder, Ruth Narine.
Right.
Two of those men became part of the government of Guyana after 2015. Did they succeed? Did they change Guyana? Did we become a better part with of Rupert Narine and Clive Thomas, your friends? Your friends, I stress again, because I saw you and them on the campus and how close you were with them.
You're right.
What happened?
Beats me.
Did you? But you must have been advising them when they came into power. Clive
no.
Thomas must have said, Jay, what do I do now that I'm...
Not at all. In visiting Guyana, we occasionally visited with those people. In particular, we went to see Clive in his office. We had a discussion that was not entirely satisfactory. And so in this interview, where you have been asking me questions and I have been giving you answers, I don't know. I cannot give an explanation of what happened.
Okay, can Mrs. Jay Mandle just come? We're closing. Let the viewers see the success behind your prolific academic work.
Please, Joan, come
She's
on.
in the studio here.
Come on. Yeah.
I know what's like to be married a long, long time to
I
a
know.
soulmate. I've been married for 45 years to the same woman.
Yep. She, in all these adventures, Joan has been part
Ladies
of
and
them.
gentlemen, you've been watching the interview with one of the Caribbean's most prolific scholar, although he's an American. He has written about Guyana, he's written about the West Indies, he's written about Grenada. In the interview, he kept saying, Joan and I, Joan and I. This is Joan. This is the lady he's been married to for 60 years. This man doesn't stop. He's, I think, slightly over 80, but he keeps writing. So there's going to be more books and more papers on the Caribbean. Thanks for viewing us. Thanks for looking at us. Our guest is Professor Jay Mandle. And speaking about his wife, we couldn't end the program without the lady in his life. You know Michael Jackson's famous song, Lady in My Life? Yeah. You want to sing a few? No. On behalf of Akash Prasad, thanks for watching us.